thank you to the foundation, to Vicente and Beatriz for making my visit here so easy to this beautiful room, this important foundation. Now, I'm going to be speaking in English. Please raise your hand if you find it very easy to understand me when I speak English like this. Okay? Ooh, but not everybody. Okay. ¿Cuántos aquí están escuchando? ¿Cuántos aquí no hablan inglés? Raise your hand. Okay, so just a few. And ¿y ustedes tienen la traducción? You have the simultaneous translation? Okay. So I will speak English at about this pace. So let's begin. So I come from a country that is having some problems, some political problems. And I flew here to Madrid yesterday, and I find that you're having some political problems. And tomorrow, I'm going to London, where I expect to find, etc. Something really weird is happening. And it's happening not to every country, but to a lot of countries. It's a strange time. It's a frightening time in some ways, but it's also a fascinating time. This is one of the great challenges we've been given. We have many challenges today, but figuring out how to do democracy is a noble one, is an important one, and it's one that we have to all work on together. That's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. We're in this strange time where nobody really knows what's happening, but we can learn from each other. And I come to you bringing a lot of lessons of what not to do with your politics. So let's begin. I put a background of beautiful stars in the background for a very manipulative psychological reason, which is that there's research showing that the emotion of awe, when we see vastness and beauty, it opens our minds, it gives us a distance from our problems, and it makes us more willing to change our way of thinking and to think creatively. So I thought I'd start with a couple of pictures of just pointless cosmic beauty, of the universe being created or stars being created, and the vastness of our world. And don't our problems seem small when you look at them from the point of view of the entire universe? Now, I'm also starting this way so that I can use a metaphor that I've been developing, which is this. There's this very interesting fact about the creation of the universe, that at the time of the Big Bang, everything comes into creation, and then for about 400 million years, there's no matter at all in the universe, just energy. And then, rather suddenly, matter begins to congeal and form, and then we begin to get stars and galaxies and everything else. Well, that's interesting. Here's another interesting thing about these dark ages, this time when there was no matter. Physicists discovered that there are about 25 or so physical constants of the universe. If you took physics in school, you know the gravitational constant, the mass of an electron. And for some of these constants, if they had been just a little bit bigger or smaller, matter would never have congealed, and there would be nothing. There'd be nothing in the universe. And so Stephen Hawking noted that the remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. Well, that's interesting. And that discovery led some people to think, well, maybe God created the universe and set those parameters so that we could be here. Maybe God created the universe and set things just right so that everything could play out, and this would be a kind of intelligent design. Now, I'm not here to comment on theological matters. I'm just using this as a metaphor. Okay, a metaphor has a source domain and then a target domain. And thinking about the source domain helps you see something about the target domain. That's why we use metaphors. Here's the target domain. What I'd like to suggest is that we take the same perspective on liberal democracy. Now, my own research on moral psychology, as you see if you read The Righteous Mind or Mente, justos, is that we evolved to be tribal primates who should never be living in large secular societies. And so, channeling E.O. Wilson, the evolutionary biologist, we might say that humans are tribal primates who evolved for life in small fission-fusion societies with intense religion, violent conflict. That's human nature. Now, obviously, we can do democracy. We've done it. But, we might say, we humans are unsuited for life in a large, diverse, secular society unless you get certain settings finely adjusted to make possible the development of stable political life. So it's possible, but there may not be much margin for error. It's possible, but it may require you to get things just right. This is the way the founders of the United States thought. So James Madison is the principal architect of the U.S. Constitution. And he and his colleagues, they wrote these amazing papers, the Federalist Papers. And in Federalist number 10, Madison talks about his great fear of faction, division, partisans hating each other, fighting and destroying the country. He used the metaphor of fire a lot, that outrage spreads like fire. And he says, hence it is that such democracies, direct democracies, have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, and have, in general, been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. So the founders of the United States knew that democracy is unstable, and they did not give us a democracy. They gave us a republic with democratic features. We now think of this as democracy, but we have to remember, they saw this as a dangerous, unstable thing, and they had to get the parameters exactly right. That's what they were trying to do. So we might think about Madison and the other founders as being like God designing the universe. And that's the way they thought of this. If we can get this complicated clock, this constitution with all these levers and pulleys, if we can get it right, maybe this country can run for centuries. So we might think about them designing the Constitution as being like designing a political universe. All right, how's it going? How is this great experiment in democracy going? Well, weird stuff started happening around 2016. Weird stuff earlier too, but 2016 is the year we really began to notice unusual sorts of events, certainly events that surprised people. Now, these were democracy in action. These were expressions of popular will by voting. But more generally, there's a big increase in political fighting and conflict within political divisions. It's not just in Europe and the West. There's also the rise of populism in Asia, and a lot of it in Latin America too, which has gone back and forth, certainly with populism. So the politics is changing around the world. I just found this in El País last week. Esto no es normal. And as you can see there, it's about la profunda fisura de la sociedad, la dificultad la convivencia civilizada entre las facciones. So people are noticing something strange is happening, not in every country, but in a lot of countries. And we're beginning to see books like this, at least in the United States, How Democracies Die, because it's quite conceivable now. I can imagine many ways in which my country will end, in which the United States will fail catastrophically. I'm not predicting that will happen, but I think the odds are not very low. I think it really could happen in the next 20 years. It's as though God reached in and just changed some parameters. Like, what if God said, let's just double the gravitational constant? What do you think? Just turn it up and see what happens. What would happen? The universe would reconfigure itself, but everything would change. And that's what it feels like, I think. That's what it feels like in many democracies, as though God reached in and changed some constant. But who could have changed? Who could have changed the parameters for the whole planet of our social and political life? Only one man, Mark Zuckerberg. Now, I don't mean that he did this deliberately to mess up democracies, but I think that is what is happening. And so I'm going to tell you about that. Now, I'll be drawing from my previous book, Mente de los Justos. This is the cover, the American paperback, which conveys the idea of angels and demons and fighting. And in the UK, they have a different publisher, a different art department. They came up with this cover, which I like, but I'm glad it's not the cover in the United States. And I'll also be talking about, as Roger talked about, my most recent book, Transformación de la mente moderna, and this is the cover in the United States, getting across the idea that a Generation Z, is failing, and we'll talk about whether that's happening here in Spain. So what I'd like to do in the rest of my time with you is do a kind of like a greatest hits, like drawing from both books, what are 4 ideas I'd like to leave you with that you can talk about with your friends that might affect how you raise your children, what you think should be done at schools, what you think what reforms might work in Spanish politics, how you think about people in other political parties. So 4 ideas I'd like to give you, and then we'll have time for conversation. So the first is what I just set us up for, that social media has changed the fundamental parameters of societies in ways that are damaging to democracy. So here are the 4 that I'll talk about. I'll do the first 3 together, and you'll see how they go together. So this is a random drawing of a network. The networks we're in determine so much about our lives. And if this was the network of your society, not a lot of people, not a lot of connections, life would feel a certain way. But if over a few decades, let's say even in 1 decade, your society grew from this to this, you would expect it to feel different. Things would be different. Politics would be different. Everything would be different if your network changes. Now, this is what happened to our species between 2008 and 2011. This is the number of monthly visitors to the major social media sites. And as you see, the numbers for our planet were down around 100 million in 2007, 2008, but then Facebook takes off and really does connect the world, which was its original mission. So things really change in those 3 years. Here's what it looks like a year ago. Facebook put out this graph. This is what it looks like when you draw connections between its 2 billion people. So society, human society, the planet, is just radically different now than it was, say, in 2006 or 2007. Now, if connecting people just meant you have more private communication. Oh, let's see. Hold on a second. Let me try to get this animation to work. This should work. Okay. It worked in the rehearsal. Oh, there we go. Okay. So communication is a two-way street, usually. We think about conversation. Certainly it's a two-way street. And that's a good conversation. And so if Facebook connected the world so we could all talk privately to each other, I think that would be a good thing. But that's not what happened. Sometimes we communicate when people are watching us. And if you imagine talking to a friend with 2 people sitting behind you versus just the 2 of you, it's very different. You now have to think about what they think you're displaying to the others as well. Well, what if it's not 2 people behind you? What if it's 100 people behind you? What if all of your communication every day, you're always talking to your friends, but everything you say to your friends, you're actually talking sort of at them, and you're more concerned with what the 100 other people are thinking of you? That would really affect the nature of communication. And I think this is what's happened, that Zuckerberg, in a sense, reached in and took the public-to-private ratio of communication and moved it up to, let's just say 100 to 1. Who knows what it is? This changes everything, I believe. So on to the second parameter. Our communication is no longer as honest or authentic. We are now all engaged in moral grandstanding. That is, speaking to the audience to try to get them to like you. And so 2 philosophers coined this term, and they say grandstanders trump up or invent moral charges. They pile on in cases of public shaming. They announce that anyone who disagrees with them is obviously wrong, and they exaggerate emotional displays. I'll just give you a couple examples. People say all kinds of things about me on the internet. Here's one. It's important to call out treasonous people like John Haidt, or people like Haidt and Chait, another analyst. They ally with white supremacists because their whiteness and white adjacency, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is wild, crazy stuff. I don't even understand what it means. But this is the sort of thing that you would say if you're trying to impress your team about how much you hate the bad people, like me. So there's a lot of this stuff now, and you have to just get used to it now that people say horrible, nasty stuff about you. Now, it wasn't always like this. Before 2009, social media was not like this at all. So this is the first real social media site, Friendster, which came out in 2002, and then MySpace came out right afterwards, and then the Facebook is what it was called originally. The Facebook came out right after that. And these were just like address books that were open to your friends that allowed you to display things about yourself. What bands do I like? What's my personality like? This is okay. This isn't changing a parameter necessarily. This is what it was like. There was no way to really spread outrage. But all this changes during this 4-year period. In 2009, Facebook adds the like button, and now everything is quantified. Everything you do can be quantified by others, and you can see how well you did. And then you can learn to optimize it to get more likes. And kids especially are picking this up. In 2009, Twitter adds the retweet button, and then Facebook copies it with the share function. So now everything's quantified, and everything can be shared instantly across your giant network. In 2011, Facebook takes its news feed, which it had had for a long time, and it's not chronological anymore. Now it's optimized by artificial intelligence and algorithms for engagement. So whatever makes you click on it, that's what you'll get more of, especially, so that often means things that make you angry. And finally, the news outlets, the newspapers and media sources have to adapt because people aren't going to them anymore. They're getting the New York Times through Facebook, for example. So all of the newspapers and magazines and TV shows have to adapt to attract people via Facebook. And so they start testing their headlines for maximum engagement. So we get the rise of headlines like this from Upworthy. A boy makes anti-Muslim comments in front of an American soldier. The soldier's reply is priceless. Okay, perfectly innocent, but it's this technique of luring you in with the promise of something unknown, and this becomes very common. CNN, a major news source, then has a headline, 14-year-old girl stabbed her little sister 40 times. The reason why will shock you. And so when the news media takes on this technique of fighting to get people to come to our site, the news changes, and it's more about, well, it's less professional, and it's more about engagement. So 2013, I believe, is, as this journalist says, the year that we, meaning journalists, the year that we broke the internet. So I want to really make it clear, the internet's wonderful, and social media didn't used to be bad, but between 2009 and 2013, I think social media changed parameters in ways that are very bad for kids, very bad for democracy. So here's where things are now. Now, this is not all of social media, but certainly Twitter and many other areas are very much like this. You see something, you respond, you share it, that triggers anger in others who share it. Whether they're really angry or just trying to get likes for their shares, I don't know. But things are much more explosive now. All right, so those are the 3 parameters, 3 of the 4. I'll come back to the 4th at the end of the talk here. So parameters changed by social media, and that's what I mean when I say it's as though Mark Zuckerberg reached in and just doubled the gravitational constant, and we're all living with the aftermath of that. My second point, social media supercharges righteous minds. So I'll just give the very briefest overview. Roger mentioned the basic principles, but if you understand how moral psychology works, you can see how social media fits exactly into the slots to bring out our tribal anger. And of course, if you're Vladimir Putin or anyone else who wants to know how to disrupt democracy, unfortunately, reading The Righteous Mind and then getting active on social media is a pretty good way to do it. So the first third of the book is about the first principle. Intuitions come first. You should address yourself. Always speak to the elephant. If the mind is divided between a small rider and a large elephant, the rider is reasoning, the elephant is all the emotions and intuitions. If you want to persuade people, talk to the elephant first so that they're not opposed to you, get them to like you, and then you can give them reasons. Well, social media really speaks to the elephant, especially when it has videos and things that really pull at your heart or make you angry. Secondly, the second principle is that there are many foundations of morality. Roger mentioned the 6 main ones that I talk about in the book. And so social media allows micro-targeting of appeals by politicians, by anyone, so that you can specifically target people's values and be much more effective in manipulating them. And finally, morality binds and blinds. So we evolved for tribalism, we evolved to make something sacred, and then our group worships it together, we circle around it, and now we can trust each other, we're unified. And so social media is very effective at making groups angry about violations of their sacred values and arousing tribal passions. Just very briefly, I'll just show you data from the United States. This is nationally representative data on how you rate different aspects of American life. One of the questions is, how do you rate the Republican Party? How do you rate the Democratic Party? On a scale of 0 to 100. 100 is very warm, 0 is very cold. I hate them. And so the percentage of Americans who assigned a rating below 20, a very, very cold rating, very negative rating, to the other party, the opposite party, was quite low all the way through the year 2000. Only about 18 or 20% of Americans said they hate the other party. But after the year 2000, in the 21st century, things really rise quite steadily, and this data actually ends in the 2016 election. I think it's much higher now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And this means that in America, we're very vulnerable to manipulation. There was a research study done by professors at MIT in which they looked at the spread of tweets, of political tweets, and what they found is that the bots don't really matter. What they found is that the Russians were able to put terrible, false things, and some true things, into circulation, and they didn't need all those bots they created. Americans were very happy to forward Russian propaganda. We will do anything to make the other side look bad. So we are very easy to exploit. And so in preparation for my trip here, I looked to see which aspects of these problems are happening here. And most of the problems that we have in the United States are happening here to some extent. So you can be the judge of this, but when I've talked to Spaniards, they seem to agree that, yes, you have a decline of the center and a rise of more extremes in your politics. So that's all I'll say about the second point. So those two were mostly from The Righteous Mind, La mente de los justos. But the political polarization is part of the problem that is shaping young people today. So let's talk about Gen Z. Is there anybody here who is under 24 years old? Please raise your hand if you're under 24. Wow, excellent. Okay, so we have a bunch of people who are in Gen Z. The cutoff in Spain might be a couple years later, so some of you might be millennials. This is unknown, but you please comment afterwards in the question period. So this is the cover that the editors selected for the book, and Greg Lukianoff and I wrote this book in response to some things that were happening at American universities. Now, I don't know if you've heard these terms, but suddenly from out of nowhere, students were requesting trigger warnings. If a professor is going to assign a book that has violence in it, or say Greek mythology, and Greek mythology often has rape in it, how can you have college students read this book without warning them? This is what some students began saying in 2014. It was very surprising to us, but it began then. At the same time, students were increasingly active in shouting down or getting people canceled. So and it wasn't always conservatives who were being canceled. Christine Lagarde, anybody who was objectionable to certain students could be canceled, and they would try to make the university rescind the invitation. Also at the same time, students started asking for safe spaces. That is, if in the case at Brown University, a debate between two feminists might be upsetting to some students. Now, they don't have to go to the debate. But knowing that the debate is happening could be so upsetting, the university had to create a space to protect them and make them feel comforted. At least that's what some students wanted them to do. So this was all very strange and all very sudden. In 2014, 2015 is when it all started. In part 3 of the book, we go through 6 reasons why this happened. It's a really interesting story. It was really fun to write. I've talked about rising polarization. That's one partial cause. Briefly, I'll talk about the other 3. the next three. So we know we have some people who are Gen Z here. How many people in the audience have children who were born after 1995? Raise your hand if you have children born after 1995. Okay, a lot of you there too. All right, so, so let's talk about what's happening to Gen Z. So Gen Z is very different from the millennial generation, at least in the United States. Canada and Britain are all very similar. I don't know, we'll talk about what's happening in Spain. The big change is that Gen Z has many fewer life experiences. They take longer to reach normal milestones, normal developmental stages. So the percentage of 12th graders, this is roughly age 18, who have a driver's license. When I was in high school here, you would get your driver's license the day that you turned 16, unless it was Sunday. Then you would wait until Monday. But you always, I mean, why would you wait? It's so exciting. But the percentage began dropping with the late millennials, and then with Gen Z, it's going down even further. The percentage who have ever had alcohol is dropping quickly. The percentage who have ever gone out on a date or any sort of romantic interaction, and the percentage who have ever had a job for money. All these things are going way down. So that when students are done with high school and coming to college, a lot of them have never driven a car, had a drink of alcohol, gone out on a date, or worked for money. And they come to college, and somebody assigns a book that has rape in it. And now they find it difficult to cope with this. They're fragile. They have had much less life experience. They're not as tough as previous generations. This is borne out in a lot of data. So this is data from universities. When in 2010 and 2012, all of the students were millennials. But by 2016, all of our students are Gen Z, and the only thing that really goes up is psychological disorders. They're very different. They have much higher rates of psychological disorders. But not most psychological disorders, only depression and anxiety. That's it. Not schizophrenia, not externalizing disorders. It's only depression and anxiety, and it's mostly the girls. So the boys' rates go up, the girls' rates go way up. And this is the universal pattern that I see in Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. This is university students. Once again, when Gen Z arrives, the rates for males go up, but the rates for females go way up. So we're beginning to talk about this, and some people have said, well, come on, it's not real. It's just that Gen Z is so comfortable talking about depression. So this is a good thing that the rates are up, because it just means they're more honest. Well, it's a good theory. It could be true, but it's not, because if we look at behavior, we see the same thing. So what this shows, this is hospital admission for non-fatal self-injury. That means teenagers who had to be hospitalized because they cut themselves or in other ways deliberately hurt themselves and had to be hospitalized. This is the number out of 100,000 in the U.S. population. And as you see, from 2001 to 2009, there's no real trend. The older teen girls have the highest rates, but it's relatively flat. What happens after 2009? The older teen girls are up 62%. This is a gigantic increase. This is not self-report. This is not changing diagnostic criteria. This is actual hospital admissions. And every girl has a terrified set of parents coming along saying, what is happening? What did we do wrong? Amazingly, the youngest girls, 10 to 14-year-olds, they never used to cut themselves. They had very low rates before. And now they cut themselves as much as 20-year-old women. It's nearly tripled. Interestingly and importantly, the oldest women in this sample, these are millennials. These are young women who did not get social media until college or later. They're not up. It's only Gen Z who got social media in middle school, around the age of 10, 11, 12. They're the ones who are up the most. We see it in suicide as well. Suicide rates have fluctuated, but in the most recent years, when Gen Z comes into the teen years, what we see is that the boys' rate is up, that's the top line. The girls' rate proportionally is up far more. The preteen girls' suicide rate in the United States is up 150% in the last few years. And it wasn't just a one-year blip. As you see, the last 4 years of data are all consistently the highest in history by far. It's the same in Britain, as I said. Once again, we see the boys, the bottom line is up a little bit. beginning around 2013, but it's the girls who are up the most. We see it in New Zealand. This is depression data. Again, in New Zealand, there's a delay. I don't think they got their kids on social media as early as we did in the United States, but they are seeing it now, too. Now, I was looking for data from Spain. I couldn't really find depression data. I found some journalists talking about it, but that doesn't prove it. That just says people are talking about it. So I don't know what's happening here in Spain. I did find data from your Instituto Nacional de Estadística, and me and a research assistant, we graphed each year ourselves. We could see the trends. So you do have a very big increase, especially the percentage increase in your teenage girls' suicides is way, way up. But the fact that it's down in the last couple years suggests that it may not be social media. This would be more consistent with responses to the financial crisis or something like that. So I don't know what's happening. You have a big increase in suicide among your teenagers, but it may be coming down. So we'll have to look for future data. The bottom line is, as with many things I'll tell you tonight, there are hints that these problems are happening in Spain, but it isn't proven yet. So you have to be very vigilant. And that's why you should all buy La Transformación de la Mente Moderna, and you should all be on the lookout for it. But seriously, you have to look out for this because it came up on us by surprise. Now, why is this happening? Why is this happening at the same time in a lot of countries with bigger impacts on girls and the biggest impact on preteen girls? That doesn't make sense as a response to a financial crisis. I mean, the financial crisis didn't hit us as hard as it hit you in Spain, but it makes no sense that economic factors would mostly affect 11-year-old girls rather than 18-year-old boys and girls. So, as I've already said, I think social media explains the timing. So here's what happened. As I said, in 2006, Facebook opens to the world. Before then, you had to be a college student. In 2007, the iPhone comes out, but it's expensive, and very few teenagers have one. By 2009, more teenagers have one, and Facebook adds the like button, which makes it more addictive. And so it's this 2-year period here, 2009 to 2011, you can see how steep these curves are. This is the 2 years in which, before this, American teenagers would go over to each other's houses and they would do something together. After this, they go home from school, they sit on their bed, and they connect electronically. And at the time, we thought, well, maybe this is okay. Maybe it's the same. But I don't think we think that anymore. As I said, this is the 2 years in which American teenagers move online, and this is just when the depression rate goes up. Social media also explains why it's mostly the girls who are suffering. Girls use social media more than boys. The boys are playing video games, and video games are not nearly as bad as social media. In fact, some people say they're not bad at all. I don't know, the research is complicated, but social media has much bigger mental health effects than do video games. Girls are much more affected by the constant social comparison. I assume it's the same here, that teenage girls will spend a lot of time composing a selfie, composing a photograph to get it exactly right. Then they post it, and they'll check within a minute or two to see if anybody liked it. This is not a healthy way to grow up, and it mostly affects the girls. Girls are more affected by fear of missing out. You can see where your friends are, either from tracking them or from their Instagram feed, and you see them all having fun, and you're not there. This is very painful, and it's probably more painful for girls than for boys. And finally, girls and boys are equally aggressive, but boys' aggression is physical. They threaten to punch each other, hurt each other. And so when they're all online, making teams to kill other groups of boys, as my son does with his friends, that's actually not bullying. That's actually practice for warfare. It's actually fun for boys. But girls' aggression is relational. Girls don't punch each other. They damage other girls' friendships or reputations. That's the way girls' aggression is expressed. And social media is an incredible gift to aggressive girls. It allows them to harm anyone they want, anytime, with full deniability. So that's my argument that social media, especially early exposure, is bad for kids. And there's a lot more data. If you go to thecoddling.com, I have reviews of the published literature looking at all the studies about social media and mental health. But there's a second cause. In the book, we talk about all these different causes. Social media is one. But the other big one, and this is one where you clearly are doing this too in Spain, is this. Children are anti-fragile. They're not fragile. Children need to experience failure, being criticized, being ostracized, being teased. They need to experience these things. Not every day, that would be terrible. But what if you could protect your child from ever being teased, from ever being excluded, from ever failing until she's 18, and then you send her out into the world? Of course that would be a disaster. It's like the immune system. If you wrap your kid raise your kid to keep her safe from dirt and germs because you don't want her to get sick, you're preventing the immune system from developing. The immune system is anti-fragile. It needs constant low rates of infection. That's why we have vaccines. If you protect the immune system from exposure to pathogens, it can't develop. If you protect children from stress, from exclusion, from everything bad, they can't develop. But that's what we started doing in the 1990s. We started overprotecting our kids and forgetting this dictum from Nietzsche that what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. So this is your typical American child now. We do everything we can to make sure that they never get hurt. And since they then don't learn to fend for themselves, we have to be there always, hovering. What if my child forgets his backpack? I'd better bring it to him at school. Otherwise, he'll learn the lesson the hard way that he should remember his backpack. And I don't want that to happen. I'll bring it to him in school. So we're always there. But if we're always there for them, then we have to always be there, even after they graduate from college. So I teach in a business school, and now I begin to hear stories. Managers will say, I gave a bad performance review to an employee, and his mother called me. Because the parents never let go. So we're really messing up our kids in the United States, and I think you're doing it here in Spain too. I'll show you in a moment. We'll do a little demonstration. So there's a lot of research on how play is essential for development. All mammals play, and in play we practice skills for adulthood, and we have a lot of play conflict. It's important to let kids play. They always have conflicts. They work them out. It's a crucial part of the learning. But in the United States, we decided in the 1990s, just as our crime rate was plummeting, when I grew up, there was a big crime wave. There was a lot of crime in the United States in the 1970s, but the kids could go out and play. Now, there's very low crime, but the kids can't go out and play because we think it's too dangerous. So here's my question for you. I'd like all of you, we'll do this. Okay, my question is, at what age were you let out of the house? At what age could you go outside with no adult, not to the backyard, but down the street, to a store, to a friend's house, 500 meters away? At what age? And if the answer was what we call first grade, I don't know what you call it here, if it was age, was it age 6? Was it age 16? What was the age? And what I'd like you to do is answer by your generation. So if you were born in 1981 or before, raise your hand high. Okay, so the older people in the audience, born before 1982, think of your number, and when I point to your area, just call it out. You can do it in Spanish. Let's do it in Spanish, okay? When I point to you, just call out, 6, 8, yes, whatever age it was, okay? Just call it out, older people. 8. Okay, we'll do it in English, okay? Okay, so you see, it's almost all 6 to 8. And that's exactly what we find in the United States. It's what I found in Australia a couple months ago, and New Zealand. So this is the normal rule for our species, actually in a lot of places they let them out at 3 or 4. But okay, by 6 to 8, kids are out getting independent experience. That's the normal developmental path. Now what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask just Gen Z. So sorry, millennials, you're not interesting because you're just in the middle. But Gen Z, so I'm going to ask all those of you who are 23 or below, and anyone who has a child between the ages of 10 and 8, anyone who has a Gen Z child between 10 and 23. So if you're a parent with a Gen Z child, you also answer. So all of you, raise your hand now. If you're Gen Z or you have an older Gen Z kid, raise your hand. Okay, just you. Think of the number, and it's the number you let your kid out at, and call it out. What number?
12. 8.
Okay, so you see what happened. We go from 6 to 8 to 10 to 12, and I heard a couple of 16s. Now tell me, how much higher is the crime rate now than it was 20 or 30 years ago? How much higher? negative 30%, right? The crime rate's much lower here. Around the world, crime rates have dropped in most advanced countries. Things are safer. Your kids have never been safer, but yet you're locking them up too. You're doing just as bad a job as we are in America. Why? What are you afraid of? Well, okay, we'll do that in the discussion section. Tell me what you're afraid of in the discussion section. But this was my concern, that this is one trait which seems identical in Spain to what's happening in America, Canada, Britain, and Australia. Now, so I hope I've shown you now that Gen Z is fragile, and part of the reason is early social media and denied independence. We don't let them out to become self-supervising. The last point I want to make is that Gen Z may be cut off from wisdom. Social media in particular may be changing socialization such that you have, or older people have much less influence on Gen Z than has ever happened before in history. That's at least a possibility. So here's how it works. I talked about the first three parameters. Now we'll do the fourth, what we might call presentism. So I want to tell you about the philosopher Edmund Burke, who expressed a very interesting fear long ago. And so I assume it's the case here too, that if you walk into a room with a bunch of teenagers, that they look like this, right? It often happens that now they might be communicating with each other, but they might be communicating with all kinds of people. And look, adults do this too. I'm not saying that the kids are unique, but for adults, their brain was already developed. It doesn't seem to be as harmful. So think about it this way. All of us have a river of information coming into our eyes and our ears. As long as we're awake, we have information coming in at various rates. What I'd like you to consider is how much of that information is new information, so less than 1 week old, and ideas, images, songs, jokes that were created within the last 7 days. How much of it is middle-aged, 10 to 50 years old? Maybe your parents or grandparents created it, so you're connected. You get information, you get ideas from previous generations. How much of it is more than 100 years old, created by people you don't even know their names? It becomes part of our cultural heritage. So if we imagine in the 19th century, I have no idea what the ratio was. And let's be clear that they had less coming in than we do now. So we have a lot more information. That's a good thing. But what about the ratio? So whatever it was in the 19th century or early 20th century, whenever that image was taken, how does it change by the mid to late 20th century, where now we have television, radio, telephone? So now, of course, the new information grows enormously, and the classic information, at least as a percentage, is going to shrink. But notice that for us older folks, we watched too much television when we were kids. Our parents were concerned that we watched too much television. But who created the television? Everything we watched was created by adults. So I grew up watching Bugs Bunny. Do you have Bugs Bunny in Spanish? Yeah. Okay, so Bugs Bunny teaches you opera, he teaches you history, he teaches you jokes from 30 years earlier. So I learned about my parents' generation in part from watching Bugs Bunny. And we often watch TV with our parents. So you'd have a shared family experience taking in certain important TV shows that everybody was watching. Well, what happens when we go from the late 20th century to the early 21st? What happens? Once young people have hyper-connected themselves to each other, there's just not much room for anything older. And what they're consuming, most of it is created by each other, not even by their parents' generation. So the river of information changes radically. And what I think is happening is what Edmund Burke feared. So Edmund Burke, the famous philosopher, an Irish, British statesman, said, "We are afraid to put men to live and trade, each on his own private stock of reason." Meaning, we're afraid to send people out into the world using just what's in their own heads. Because we suspect that this stock in each man is small, and we suspect that the individuals would do better to avail themselves of the general bank and capital of nations and of ages. Okay, the language is a little bit difficult if you're not a native speaker, but he's saying we don't send people out to live just on what they think because we know that they don't have much in their own heads and that they're much better off if they can draw from the collected wisdom of humanity and of the ages. Okay, so it's a very good insight, a very interesting idea, and I think that's what's happened. So Gen Z is the first generation, possibly in human history, to be cut off from the transmission of stories from previous generations. Now, of course, they have Wikipedia. They can get access to anything, which is great, but what are they getting access to? So our efforts, whatever virtues there are in Spanish society, whatever virtues you want to impart to your kids, might be very difficult because they're just not listening. They're not connected to you as much as previous generations were. So that's why I think the image that they picked here is very interesting. It's this. I'm sure most of you have been here. My family, we went to Barcelona last summer. We went to this beautiful, beautiful bookstore, and it's got young kids there. That's great, but there's something a little incongruous, and it's in part because I think it's especially the girl with the phone taking a photo. It's like they're in this great, infinite library, just taking selfies to post on Instagram. So it's at least, I didn't talk about them when they made the cover, but I quite like the design. I think it captures a bit that flavor. So that's my point about Gen Z may be cut off from wisdom. And again, I'm going to ask you Gen Z folks to criticize me. Please tell me if I'm wrong. I want to hear what I've missed here and what's going on with your generation. Okay, so what can we do? If it's true that the parameters of social life have changed, and I was at the Prado yesterday, I should have used this as an abstract for my talk. I think this is basically the condition of some parts of society. So what can we do? I don't have time to go into details. These are all very complicated topics, but I think democracy and Gen Z are going to have a hard time until we change social media to make it less contagious and less focused on spreading outrage and social comparison and all the other things it does. I think we need to really be thinking about changes to democracy to increase public support for it. In the United States, we have a very inefficient system. Voting is inefficient. It's easy to tamper with. I shouldn't say tamper. There are a lot of problems with the way that we vote, the way we select our candidates, a lot of things that do not inspire trust in the system. Third, we need to make changes in parenting and education, clearly in the United States, and I think here. We need to give kids a lot more independence, certainly when they're in the crucial years. Ages 8 to 12 is historically the period of adventures. If you look at children's stories, they're always going out between 8 and 12, and they don't usually bring their parents. So we need to give kids more independence, and I think we need to delay social media ultimately to 16. That's unrealistic today, but eventually I hope there'll be a consensus that kids should not be connecting by social media. Texting is fine, phone is fine. It's the public conversation that I think is not fine. And finally, I think we all need to make changes to ourselves. And this is the one thing that we really can control on our own. If we live in an age of outrage, I think we can actually look to the wisdom of the ancients, all of whom, or every literate society has a quote like this, that we are prone to hypocrisy. We get angry at others for sins that we ourselves commit. We all know this. This is ancient wisdom. This is universal wisdom. Buddha says, in this world, hate never yet dispelled hate, only love dispels hate. You too shall pass away. Knowing this, how can you quarrel? It's a slightly different idea, but in the happiness hypothesis, I have all kinds of quotes from the ancients about be less moralistic, be more morally humble, stop getting angry so quickly, give people the benefit of the doubt. Okay, we all know this. Well, now's the time to do it. We're drowning in outrage. Our countries are suffering. Now is the time to do it. And so I've begun proposing that people take this simple pledge. And so I'd like you, read these, and if you're willing to say it out loud with me, together we'll say it as a kind of a pledge that you might make. You don't have to, but the basic idea is this. Now that we're all so connected and sending around so much outrage, a lot of which is false and some of which is true, we need to first, we do need to be more careful about what we say. We need to, in an explosive time, we do need to be more polite and more sensitive to others. But that doesn't help unless we also make a commitment to be less sensitive ourselves, meaning to take offense less quickly, to let things pass, to assume good intention. And finally, because so much stuff is flowing through us, don't be a conduit. Don't pass through so much outrage. Delete almost all of it. Don't forward it. And so if you're on the count of three, I'll ask you to repeat with me in English. I should have put it up in Spanish too. And it's not completely binding. Think of it as an aspiration. This is not an oath. This is an aspiration. I aspire to, okay? So 1, 2, 3. I will give less offense. I will take less offense. I will pass on less offense. Okay, if you can get everyone in Spain to do this and then to live up to it, you're going to be okay. And so those are my 4 ideas that might help you understand our strange time. Thank you.